At 54, Chris Tucker is often the subject of emotional, misleading videos that suggest his life took a tragic turn. But the reality is far more grounded and even admirable. He rose to global fame in the late 1990s and early 2000s, especially through the blockbuster Rush Hour franchise alongside Jackie Chan, becoming one of the highest-paid actors of his time. However, instead of continuing non-stop in Hollywood, Tucker made a conscious decision to step back from the spotlight. He became more devoted to his faith, turned down roles he felt didn't align with his values, and chose quality over quantity in his career. During this period, he also faced financial challenges, including tax issues, which were widely publicized and often exaggerated online. Despite this, he did not disappear or fall apart. He simply shifted priorities. In recent years, he has made a quiet return, including a well-received role in the film Air, and has gone back to performing stand-up comedy. Today, Chris Tucker lives a more private and balanced life, still active but no longer chasing the intense fame of his earlier years, showing that stepping away from the spotlight doesn't mean failure. It can also mean growth and control over one's own path. As time went on, Chris Tucker also became more intentional about the kinds of messages he wanted to put into the world. Unlike many actors who chase constant visibility, he seemed comfortable letting his legacy speak for itself while focusing on personal growth. This shift can be surprising for fans who remember his explosive energy in films like Rush Hour, where his fast-talking, high-pitched comedic style made him unforgettable next to Jackie Chan. But that same intensity that made him famous also meant he needed balance, and stepping back gave him the space to redefine success on his own terms. One important aspect of Tucker's later life is how he handled adversity. His tax issues, which became public in the 2000s, were often framed as a downfall. But in reality, they were financial challenges that many celebrities have faced at some point. What set him apart was his approach. Rather than spiraling, he worked through them, took responsibility, and gradually resolved the situation. This period became less about fame and more about discipline, accountability, and rebuilding stability. It's a reminder that setbacks, even public ones, don't define a person's entire story. Another interesting shift is how Tucker reconnected with his roots in stand-up comedy. Before Hollywood, stand-up was where he built his voice, and returning to it allowed him to engage directly with audiences again. Unlike acting, which depends on scripts and production, stand-up is raw and personal. For Tucker, this was a way to stay creative without compromising his values. His newer performances tend to be more reflective, mixing humor with life lessons, showing how much he has evolved since his early days. His role in Air also marked a subtle but meaningful comeback. While it wasn't a loud, blockbuster-style return, it demonstrated that he still has strong screen presence and acting ability. More importantly, it showed that he is willing to participate in projects that align with his current perspective, rather than simply chasing big paychecks. This selective approach might make his appearances rare, but it also makes them more meaningful. At 54, Tucker represents a different kind of success story, one that isn't based on constant visibility or dominance in the entertainment industry. Instead, it's about longevity, self-awareness, and control. Many celebrities struggle with fading fame, trying to recreate past glory or stay relevant at any cost. Tucker, on the other hand, seems to have accepted that life has different phases. His peak in Hollywood was undeniable, but he doesn't appear to be trapped by it. It's also worth noting how public perception can be shaped by media narratives. Emotional videos and headlines often highlight contrast, then versus now, to create a sense of loss or tragedy. When viewers see someone who was once everywhere suddenly appearing less frequently, it's easy to assume something went wrong. But in Tucker's case, the reality is more nuanced. He didn't disappear. He simply stepped back from the pace and pressure of mainstream fame. There's also a broader lesson in how Tucker's story reflects the idea of redefining priorities over time. In younger years, ambition and opportunity often drive decisions. But as people grow older, values can shift toward peace, purpose, and authenticity. Tucker's emphasis on faith and selective work choices shows that he values alignment over attention. That kind of mindset is not always visible from the outside, especially in an industry that rewards constant output. In many ways, his journey challenges the typical narrative of celebrity success. Instead of a straight line of rising fame followed by decline, his path looks more like a curve: intense success, intentional withdrawal, and then a quieter, more grounded continuation. That doesn't make his story less interesting. If anything, it makes it more real. Life isn't always about staying at the top. It's about knowing when to step back and why. Today, Chris Tucker remains a respected figure in entertainment, even if he isn't constantly in the spotlight. Fans still recognize his impact, and his past performances continue to entertain new generations. At the same time, his current lifestyle shows that fulfillment doesn't have to come from constant public attention. By choosing his own pace and direction, he has managed to maintain both his identity and his peace of mind. Ultimately, the emotional videos may try to tell a story of decline, but the truth is closer to transformation. Chris Tucker at 54 is not a fallen star. He's someone who experienced massive success, faced challenges, and then consciously reshaped his life. And in a world that often equates visibility with value, that kind of quiet confidence might be one of his most impressive achievements. Beyond his career choices and personal challenges, Chris Tucker's story also highlights something deeper about identity and longevity in the entertainment industry. Many actors who reach the level of fame he once had often struggle with being typecast or permanently associated with a single role or persona. For Tucker, that persona was the loud, fast-talking, high-energy comedic character that audiences loved in Rush Hour. While that role brought him immense success, it also created expectations that could be difficult to sustain over time. Instead of trying to endlessly replicate that same energy, Tucker chose to evolve, even if it meant stepping away from what made him most popular. This decision reflects a level of self-awareness that is not always common in Hollywood. The pressure to remain relevant can push many performers into taking roles they don't believe in or overexposing themselves to the public. Tucker resisted that pressure. By doing so, he maintained a sense of authenticity that many fans may not immediately recognize, but can appreciate in the long run. His absence from the spotlight wasn't a disappearance. It was a form of control. Another important dimension of his life is how he values relationships and experiences outside of fame. Over the years, Tucker has been known to participate in humanitarian efforts and travel, often connecting with influential figures and global initiatives. While these aspects of his life are less publicized than his film career, they contribute to a broader understanding of who he is beyond entertainment. It shows that his priorities are not limited to Hollywood success, but extend to making a meaningful impact in other areas. His friendship and professional relationship with Jackie Chan also remains one of the most iconic partnerships in film history. The chemistry they shared in Rush Hour wasn't just acting. It reflected a genuine connection that audiences could feel. Even years later, fans continue to hope for another installment, not just for nostalgia, but because of the unique dynamic they brought to the screen. Whether or not that reunion happens, their collaboration has already secured its place in cinematic history. As Tucker continues to age, his perspective seems increasingly focused on balance rather than ambition alone. This is a natural progression for many people, but in the context of celebrity culture, it stands out. The industry often celebrates constant hustle and visibility, But Tucker's approach suggests that stepping back can be just as powerful as pushing forward. By limiting his appearances and choosing projects carefully, he ensures that when he does show up, it matters. His performance in Air is a good example of this philosophy in action. Rather than trying to reclaim his past image, he embraced a role that fit his current stage in life. It was a quieter performance compared to his earlier work, but it demonstrated depth and maturity. This kind of evolution is often overlooked because it doesn't generate the same level of hype, but it is essential for long-term relevance and personal satisfaction. There is also a lesson in how Tucker handles public perception. In the age of social media, narratives can spread quickly, often without full context. Videos that frame his life as a decline rely on selective storytelling, focusing on contrasts rather than continuity. But Tucker's journey is not about losing everything. It's about changing direction. Understanding this requires looking beyond headlines and considering the choices he has made intentionally. In many ways, Tucker represents a counter-narrative to the idea that success must be constant and visible. His life shows that it is possible to achieve incredible fame, step away, face challenges, and still maintain dignity and purpose. This kind of story may not be as dramatic as the rise and fall narratives often portrayed online, but it is arguably more realistic and inspiring. As he moves forward, there is still curiosity about what he might do next. Whether it's more stand-up comedy, selective film roles, or entirely new ventures, Tucker has the freedom to choose his path without the pressure that once defined his career. That freedom is something many people strive for but rarely achieve, especially in such a competitive industry. Ultimately, Chris Tucker at 54 is not defined by what he no longer does, but by the choices he continues to make. His journey is less about maintaining a peak and more about sustaining a meaningful life. For fans who grew up watching him, this might feel different from what they expected, but it offers a valuable perspective. Success is not just about how high you climb, but about how you choose to live once you've been there. What makes Chris Tucker's journey even more compelling is how it reflects the reality that fame is not always meant to be permanent in its most intense form. At the height of his career, he was everywhere. Interviews, blockbuster films, award shows, and his voice and personality were instantly recognizable. But sustaining that level of exposure can be exhausting, both mentally and emotionally. For many celebrities, the pressure to constantly perform, entertain, and remain relevant can lead to burnout. Tucker's decision to step away, whether fully understood at the time or not, can now be seen as a form of self-preservation. In an industry that often rewards overexposure, Tucker's restraint is unusual. He didn't flood the market with projects just to stay visible. Instead, he allowed time to pass, letting anticipation build naturally. This is a strategy that can be risky, as audiences may move on, but it can also preserve an artist's uniqueness. When people think of Tucker, they still remember the sharp comedic timing, the distinctive voice, and the unforgettable scenes from Rush Hour. That image hasn't been diluted by excessive appearances or forgettable roles. There's also a deeper emotional layer to how audiences react to his story. Many fans associate Tucker with a specific era of their lives, the late 90s and early 2000s, when his movies were at their peak. Seeing him less frequently can feel like losing a piece of that time, which is why videos with dramatic titles gain so much traction. They tap into nostalgia and the fear that something once vibrant has faded away. But in reality, Tucker hasn't disappeared. He has simply moved into a different phase, one that isn't centered on constant public attention. Another key point is how Tucker's choices challenge the traditional definition of success. In Hollywood, success is often measured by how often you appear on screen, how much money your films make, or how large your fan base is at any given moment. By those standards, stepping back might seem like a decline. But Tucker's life suggests a different perspective, one where success includes personal fulfillment, alignment with one's values, and the ability to control one's own narrative. His continued involvement in stand-up comedy reinforces this idea. Unlike film, which can take years to produce and relies on many external factors, stand-up allows Tucker to connect directly with audiences in real time. It's a more intimate form of performance, and it reflects a return to his roots. This choice shows that his passion for comedy never disappeared. It simply evolved. Instead of performing for massive global audiences through blockbuster films, he now engages with people in a more personal and immediate way. Working again in films like Air also demonstrates that Tucker hasn't closed the door on Hollywood. He has just redefined his relationship with it. He no longer needs to prove himself or chase the biggest roles. Instead, he can participate in projects that interest him, collaborate with people he respects, and contribute in ways that feel meaningful. This level of freedom is something that many actors never reach, as they remain tied to the expectations of studios and audiences. It's also important to consider how maturity plays a role in all of this. At 54, Tucker is not the same person he was in his 20s or 30s, and expecting him to be would be unrealistic. Growth naturally brings changes in priorities, energy levels, and perspectives. What once felt exciting, constant filming, media attention, and high-pressure schedules, may no longer hold the same appeal. Instead, stability, purpose, and peace can become more valuable. The way Tucker carries himself today reflects that maturity. He appears more grounded, more thoughtful, and less driven by external validation. This doesn't mean he has lost his charisma or talent. Rather, those qualities are now expressed differently. His humor may be less frantic but more reflective, his presence less frequent but more intentional. Ultimately, the fascination with what happened to Chris Tucker says as much about society as it does about him. People are used to narratives of rise and fall, success and failure, fame and obscurity. But Tucker's story doesn't fit neatly into those categories. It's not a story of losing everything. It's a story of choosing something different. And perhaps that's why it resonates on a deeper level. Because beyond the fame, the films, and the headlines, his journey reflects a universal truth. Life is not just about reaching the top, but about deciding what truly matters once you get there. As the years continue to pass, the story of Chris Tucker becomes less about what he has lost and more about what he has chosen to keep. In a world where many public figures are constantly reinventing themselves to stay relevant, Tucker's approach feels almost countercultural. He hasn't drastically changed his identity to fit trends, nor has he tried to compete with a new generation of entertainers dominating social media and streaming platforms. Instead, he has remained grounded in who he is, allowing his legacy to stand without constant reinforcement. One of the most striking aspects of Tucker's journey is how it highlights the difference between public demand and personal desire. Audiences may want more films like Rush Hour, more high-energy performances, and more of the version of Tucker they remember from decades ago. But personal growth doesn't always align with audience expectations. Tucker's willingness to prioritize his own values over external pressure shows a level of independence that is rare, especially for someone who once operated at the highest level of Hollywood fame. This independence also reshapes how we interpret silence or absence. In entertainment, being out of the spotlight is often viewed negatively, as if it signals irrelevance or decline. But Tucker's case suggests something different. that absence can be intentional and even necessary. By stepping away, he avoided the risk of overexposure, creative burnout, and the kind of career fatigue that affects many long-running celebrities. In doing so, he preserved not only his reputation, but also his passion for the craft. Another layer to consider is how Tucker's comedic style itself has aged. Comedy is one of the most time-sensitive forms of art, often tied to cultural context and generational humor. What worked perfectly in the late 90s may not resonate in exactly the same way today. Rather than forcing his old style into a new era, Tucker appears to have adapted, becoming more reflective and measured in his delivery. This evolution allows him to stay authentic while still connecting with audiences, even if the tone has shifted. His return to stand-up is particularly meaningful in this regard. Stand-up comedy demands honesty and presence. It's just the performer and the audience, with no special effects or editing to rely on. For Tucker, this format provides a space where he can express his current perspective, shaped by years of experience, challenges, and personal growth. It's not about recreating the past, but about sharing who he is now. The film Air further reinforces this idea of evolution. Instead of trying to dominate the screen with the same intensity as before, Tucker embraced a role that required subtlety and depth. This kind of performance may not generate the same immediate excitement as his earlier work, but it demonstrates range and maturity. It shows that his talent was never limited to one type of character. It simply took time and the right opportunities to reveal different dimensions. There is also something quietly powerful about the way Tucker's story contrasts with the typical rise and fall narrative often applied to celebrities. Those narratives are appealing because they are simple and dramatic, but they rarely capture the full truth. Tucker's life doesn't fit into a neat category of success followed by failure. Instead, it represents a continuous process of change, adaptation, and self-definition. This perspective becomes even more relevant when considering how younger audiences encounter his work. Many people discovering him today may first see clips from Rush Hour online, without the context of his broader journey. For them, Tucker might seem like a figure from a specific moment in time. But understanding his choices and evolution adds depth to that image, transforming him from just a comedic actor into someone who navigated fame on his own terms. In the end, Chris Tucker's story is not about disappearance, decline, or even comeback in the traditional sense. It's about continuity, about finding a way to move forward without losing yourself. At 54, he stands as an example of how success can be redefined over time, shifting from external validation to internal satisfaction. And perhaps that is why his story continues to resonate. Because beyond the headlines and viral videos, it reflects a question that many people eventually face. Not just how to succeed, but how to live with that success in a way that feels true. Looking even deeper, the life of Chris Tucker also reflects how rare it is for someone to step away from peak success without being forced to. In many cases, actors slow down because opportunities disappear, audiences move on, or controversies push them out of the spotlight. Tucker's situation was different. At a time when he could have continued dominating box offices, especially after the massive success of Rush Hour, he chose to reduce his output. That distinction matters because it changes the narrative from one of loss to one of intention. It's also important to understand how financial success early in his career gave him the freedom to make those choices. Being one of the highest-paid actors of his time meant that Tucker was not dependent on constantly working to maintain his lifestyle. While his tax issues later created complications, they did not erase the foundation he had built. This financial independence allowed him to prioritize personal values, faith, and long-term well-being over short-term gains. Another dimension that often goes unnoticed is how Tucker's personality fits, or doesn't fit, the modern entertainment landscape. Today's industry is heavily driven by social media presence, constant engagement, and rapid content production. Celebrities are expected to share their lives regularly, interact with fans online, and maintain visibility across multiple platforms. Tucker has never fully embraced that model. His relatively low online presence and selective public appearances set him apart from newer generations of entertainers. This difference can sometimes be misinterpreted as inactivity, but in reality, it is simply a different way of existing in the public eye. Tucker belongs to a generation of performers whose careers were built primarily through films, live performances, and traditional media. His continued relevance without heavy reliance on social media is a testament to the strength of his original impact. People still remember him not because he is constantly visible, but because what he created left a lasting impression. His collaboration with Jackie Chan is a perfect example of that lasting impact. The chemistry they shared in Rush Hour became iconic, transcending cultural and language barriers. Even today, discussions about a potential sequel generate excitement, showing that the connection audiences feel to those films has not faded. This kind of enduring popularity is something that many actors strive for, but rarely achieve. At the same time, Tucker's willingness to avoid repeating the same formula endlessly shows restraint. While it might have been financially beneficial to produce more sequels or similar roles, doing so could have diluted the uniqueness of his performances. By stepping back, he preserved the originality of his work, ensuring that it remains memorable rather than overused. His role in Air serves as a reminder that talent does not disappear with time. It evolves. In that film, Tucker brought a sense of calm confidence and depth that contrasts with the high-energy roles of his past. This shift highlights not only his growth as an actor, but also his ability to adapt without losing authenticity. There is also a philosophical aspect to Tucker's journey that resonates beyond entertainment. His story challenges the idea that life must follow a single upward trajectory. Instead, it shows that stepping back, reassessing priorities, and choosing a different path can be just as meaningful as pushing forward. This is a lesson that applies to anyone, not just celebrities. As people grow older, their definitions of success often change. What once seemed important, fame, recognition, constant activity, may give way to deeper values like peace, purpose, and connection. Tucker's life reflects this shift clearly. He appears less concerned with proving himself and more focused on living in alignment with what matters to him personally. In a way, the curiosity surrounding his life today says more about the audience than about Tucker himself. People are drawn to dramatic transformations, especially those that involve apparent decline. But when a story doesn't fit that pattern, it can be harder to process. Tucker's journey is not about losing everything or making a dramatic comeback. It's about maintaining control and evolving quietly. And that quiet evolution might be the most powerful part of his story. In an industry built on noise, attention, and constant visibility, choosing a quieter path requires confidence. It means trusting that your value does not depend on how often you are seen, but on who you are and what you choose to contribute. At 54, Chris Tucker stands as a reminder that success is not a fixed point, but an ongoing process. It's not defined solely by past achievements or current visibility, but by the ability to navigate change with intention. His story continues, not as a dramatic rise or fall, but as a steady, thoughtful progression, shaped by choice, rather than circumstance. In many ways, the continued interest in Chris Tucker also reveals how audiences struggle to accept that people can evolve beyond the version of themselves that made them famous. When someone becomes iconic for a specific role or energy, like Tucker did in Rush Hour, that image tends to freeze in time. Fans often want that same version forever, unchanged and consistently entertaining. But real life doesn't work that way. Growth, aging, and changing priorities are inevitable, even for celebrities. What makes Tucker's situation unique is that he didn't try to fight that reality. He didn't attempt to recreate the exact same persona repeatedly just to satisfy expectations. Instead, he allowed himself to grow naturally, even if that meant confusing or disappointing some fans who were hoping for a more traditional career trajectory. This willingness to change without over-explaining himself reflects a quiet confidence that not everyone possesses. Another element worth considering is how Tucker's absence created a kind of mystique around him. In an era where celebrities are constantly visible, someone who appears only occasionally can become even more intriguing. Each appearance carries more weight because it's rare. This scarcity keeps audiences curious and engaged, even if they don't fully understand his choices. In a strange way, by doing less, Tucker has maintained a certain level of cultural relevance. It's also interesting to think about how his comedic voice fits into today's world. Comedy has evolved significantly, with new styles, platforms, and sensitivities shaping what audiences find funny. Tucker's original style, fast-paced, loud, and highly expressive, was perfectly suited for his time. Now, his humor seems to carry more perspective, shaped by years of life experience. That shift doesn't make it less valuable. It simply makes it different. It becomes less about immediate laughs and more about connection and storytelling. His work in Air is another reminder that reinvention doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. Instead of announcing a comeback or trying to dominate headlines, Tucker simply stepped into a role and delivered a solid performance. That approach suggests that he is no longer driven by the need to prove anything. He has already achieved what many only dream of, and now he can engage with his craft on his own terms. There is also a sense of balance that defines his current life. Fame often comes with extremes: extreme attention, extreme pressure, extreme expectations. Tucker seems to have moved away from those extremes, finding a more stable middle ground. This balance allows him to remain connected to his career without being consumed by it. It's a position that offers both freedom and sustainability, something that is difficult to achieve in such a competitive industry. Looking at his journey as a whole, it becomes clear that the question, "What happened to Chris Tucker?" is somewhat misleading. Nothing dramatic happened in the way people might expect. There was no sudden collapse, no irreversible downfall. Instead, there was a series of choices, some influenced by personal beliefs, others by life circumstances, that gradually shaped a different path. This kind of story may not fit neatly into viral video narratives, but it carries a deeper truth. Not every successful person is meant to stay in the spotlight forever, and stepping away doesn't erase what they've accomplished. Tucker's legacy, particularly through Rush Hour, remains intact, regardless of how often he appears on screen today. In fact, his reduced presence might even enhance that legacy. Without constant new material to compare, audiences continue to revisit and appreciate his past work. It becomes timeless rather than tied to a specific moment. This is something that many artists aim for but cannot control. As time goes on, Tucker's story may continue to evolve in unexpected ways. He might take on new roles, return to stand-up more actively, or explore entirely different ventures. Or he may continue exactly as he is now, selective, intentional, and quietly present. Either way, the direction will likely reflect his own values rather than external expectations. Ultimately, Chris Tucker's journey is less about fame and more about ownership. Ownership of his career, his image, and his life. At 54, he represents the idea that success is not just about reaching the top, but about having the freedom to decide what comes next. And in a world that constantly demands more, choosing less can sometimes be the most powerful decision of all.